Hello, and thank you so much for being here for our second annual Black History Walk. My name is Katrina Bowman Thomas, and I am the Executive Director for Northern Kentucky Community Action Commission. And again, we are glad that you have joined us. Today, we will tour through Newport and we'll see the rich history, the rich African American history that's right here in our community. We started these walks because we wanted to expose the community to the rich culture that is right here. And in Newport, you'll see a lot of music, you'll see some juke joints, you'll see historic churches, things that you never knew existed. Take this opportunity to talk to your neighbor and to learn about them and to learn about your neighbors. That's what this is all about, for us to walk and explore together. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors: Green Sky, Red Hawk, St. Elizabeth Healthcare, First World Architects, Reed Newport, and Trinity Church. We so appreciate all of your support, and this walk would not have been possible without you. And now you'll hear directly from a few of our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Matt Strippelhoff from Red Hawk Technologies. We're a software development company here in the area, and we think it's really important to support our community and all the good things that Northern Kentucky Community Action Commission are doing for us. And Black history is really important to celebrate, so we're glad to be part of this. I hope you enjoy the virtual walk.
Hello, my name is Jeff Moran, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Customer Service at Green Sky. And once again this year, we are honored to be a sponsor for the upcoming Black History Walk in October, in partnership with the Northern Kentucky Community Action Commission. This will be our second year participating, and just find it incredibly rewarding that we can help others understand the rich history that we have in the Covington area and the role that our region has played in equality and inclusion and diversity. We are just honored once again as a company to be a part of this, to play a small role in this, and to help others understand our history. So my hope is that you will enjoy this walk, that you will understand the importance that this area has played in the historical significance that Northern Kentucky is. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing everybody for the walk. Have a great day.
Again, we're so glad you're here. Enjoy the day, enjoy your exploration.
We are here at the Southgate Street School. This is a wonderful building that was built in 1893, being utilized as a museum now, to talk about Newport history and the rich life that students had as they were students here at the school. We are located on Southgate Street, which is an old street here in the city of Newport, but significant in the fact that this is part of the old plan of the city. This is one of the oldest sections, and this building that we're in now, that we're going to talk about, has stood here since 1893 and was built to educate African American children. So this school was established with city funds in 1871. They bought land here on Southgate Street and built a frame building that served the community until this building here was built in 1893. So 1893, it's quite bustling in Newport. It's a thriving river town, and it's important that all of the children of Newport be educated. And the laws dictated segregated schools at the time. And so this building was built in two sections. The first part is this front part right where we are. The second part was built the same year after they tore down the frame building that had served the community for 20 years. Exciting things happened in the school building. These students were educated until 1955, when Brown versus Board of Education came about and desegregated the schools. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But in the meantime, let me tell you how this was set up and how the curriculum worked. This building is basically 4 large rooms. This is one of the classrooms. This classroom was originally for the first and second graders. The school setup that you see behind us is merely representative, but what was done was half of the class, or the first grade class, faced one way, the second grade class faced the other way. And so one teacher taught both grades in each room, but not together, separately for each of their needs. And because there are 4 large classrooms here, what we saw was grades 1 through 8 were here from 1893 until 1955. There was a high school that operated until 1921, but at that point, more space was needed for the grades 1 through 8. The high school students went over to Grant High School in Covington, and the city paid tuition for the students to go. What's exciting about this is the education that the children got here. It was a dedicated school for African American students. The instructors were African American as well. Many of them long-term students that had been here for a number of years. One of them was Miss Ellis, who was a graduate of the Southgate Street School and came back here to teach, and she taught for roughly some 20 years after that. Another exciting educator was Miss Bond. Miss Bond, Ruth Bond, kept a tight handle on what happened in the school. So we have oral histories that tell us that although she was strict, she was fair. And so as these students continued to be here, she taught them year after year. When the school desegregated in 1955, and they walked literally and crossed the color line by going down Southgate Street to the 4th Street School, what we found was not only did the educators desegregate as well, the Newport schools, but Miss Bond went on to teach in Newport for another 12 years. I believe she is actually the first African American teacher to teach in the Newport schools. The education that the students received here was stellar. They were taught all of the classics, literature and music and theater, and they were empowered. You can be whoever you want to be. So we have oral histories where former students have said that in this school, they were educated to be the best that they could, that they would go on to college, that maybe your parents worked in some of the casinos or worked in the nightclubs or worked maybe even as a domestic, but you could do more. You could go beyond working at the steel mill. You could be whoever you want to be. And we actually have students that have come back and told us that's exactly what happened, is that they felt empowered here. And for the students that actually desegregated to the 4th Street School, some of them missed the education that they got here because they had a better focus. We have a wonderful oral history of a student that was actually said, you're answering too many questions here at the 4th Street School. Well, she said, at my school, I was taught to speak up and to tell what I know. And they disciplined her for that. And she said, well, I'm going to make something of myself. And she did. And her picture is now down on the flood wall here in Newport as she graduated from NKU, and she ended up with 2 advanced degrees. We're very fortunate in that after the desegregation of the schools, the Newport Lodge 120, a Prince Hall Masonic Lodge, bought the building. So we are fortunate in that this building has been preserved since 1959 by the Prince Hall Masons here in Newport, who allow us to use the 2 bottom classrooms and the basement to interpret Newport history as well as the history of this wonderful school. Part of what we do here is we interpret all of Newport history. So if you want to learn more about the Southgate Street School, the role that it played in Newport history, come visit us. Right now we are taking appointments only, but we hope soon to be able to be open on a regular basis to people to visit. One of the programs we're very excited about when we have people visit is our oral history program. So if out there, if you have connections to Newport, if you have connections to the Southgate Street School, some of the early years, we would welcome the opportunity to do an oral history with you and hear your stories.
We're here at 6th and Saratoga Street here in Newport, Kentucky, the gateway to one of the first prominent African American communities here in Newport, Kentucky. This stop actually is very near and dear to my heart, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Here we're going to be talking about the residents, the African American residents of Newport, Kentucky. As you know, Cincinnati just lies to the north of us, and it is the largest city on the Ohio River. So naturally, during antebellum, this was a perfect place for African American societies to grow. And Newport and Covington were actually gateways to freedom during the antebellum time. We didn't see the African American population grow until the turn of the century, right before Great Migration. The Great Migration was when a period from starting about 1916 where African Americans from the South came north to find prosperity with jobs and lifestyle. And that's the first time that we actually see the starting of an African American neighborhood or area where African Americans congregated and lived. And that's here on Saratoga Street. And starting at 6th and Saratoga, going several blocks south. This place is near and dear to my heart because I am a product of that Great Migration here to Newport. We're actually standing in front of the former spot where my great-grandmother traveled from Clifton, Tennessee to Newport around 1905. And she worked in homes that were just east of Saratoga, the wealthier homes. And she basically lived her entire life on this block. Generations of African Americans actually grew up on this block. From 6th Street on south, there were multiple African American families that populated this street. It was an affordable place. This was one of the first examples of quote-unquote redlining in the country where African Americans were subjugated to rent only in low-income areas. One of the places that made this street so affordable is that the railroad actually went through the middle of the street. So it was not a desirable place for people to live, but African Americans were able to rent property and also buy homes in this area. As a child, I do actually remember the railroad going down the middle of the street. So I remember stories of my mother telling me that if she was about 5 minutes late getting out to school, she would actually be a half hour late because she would have to wait for the train to pass to get to school, which was on the other side of the railroad tracks. As the projects were built, the African American population moved to congregate in that area. But again, Saratoga still served as the basis for the African American families here in Newport. Corinthian Baptist Church is the oldest African American church in Newport. In 1866, a group of African Americans living in the city gathered together to establish the historic congregation. Although many worshipers had already been meeting for prayer among themselves, under the spiritual guidance of Dennis Lightfoot, in 1866, a group of African Americans living in the city gathered together to establish the historic organization. It wasn't until 1872 that the congregation took on the name Corinthian Baptist, and just a year later, in 1873, found a new home on Robert Street. Close to a decade later, the congregation made its way to a new home when they purchased the old German Baptist church at the corner of Columbia and 6th Streets. George Wiedemann sought to expand his brewery business, and the church consented to sell for a fee of $2,000 in 1892. 3 trustees, William G., William Moore, and William Thompson, acquired the First Presbyterian Church at 520 Columbia as their next house of worship for $3,000, of which $1,500 was paid as down payment. This location is referred to as Old Corinthian. Like many churches and other structures in Newport, Corinthian Baptist was heavily damaged by the flood of 1937. The congregation still stood strong and stood by their church to fight the floodwaters and, in time, restored the structure. In 1956, the Newport Board of Education sought to purchase the building at 520 Columbia Street to build a new school. Even though the church fought the school board's claim of eminent domain, the congregation was ordered to sell the church property for $23,000. The congregation used the funds to purchase Bailey's grocery store located at 7th and Saratoga. The store was torn down and a new church was built. The members met at the Newport Courthouse under the Reverend E.O. Givens until the new building was ready. The church was dedicated on April 2nd, 1958, and celebrations took place from May 15th through June 1st, 1958. On May 15th, the cornerstone was laid by the Newport Masonic Lodge 120, and Reverend R.D. West delivered the sermon.
Corinthian Missionary Baptist Church at one time was the pillar of the community for the African American. You couldn't get a seat in the church. They were outside standing around and just to listen to the sermon. There were a couple other smaller churches around that people went to, but we were somewhat the mother church. Even when you went to another church, you still went to Corinthian as well. We still today do most of the funerals of the older community. They come to us, and we do it for free. I just found out a few years ago that my relative was one of the founders of it, which you have Dennis Lightfoot. My mother is a Lightfoot. It would make me probably the second great-granddaughter, generation granddaughter. We are working on a massive membership drive as we speak. And in the campaign, what our focus is the new community, because it's so new. 80% of the town is gone, either passed away or moved away. So we have fresh people that need the Lord. And once we put this together, which is coming in about a month and a half, I think there'll be a big difference in what's happening with the church. It'll start to grow again.
The 4th Street School started off as a public school that was funded around the 1790s, and it was one of the first public school systems actually west of Pittsburgh in the Ohio River Valley. Then in 1838, the School Act was passed. That was when the academy that began as a public but private school for white males that could actually afford the tuition, then became a public school. The 2nd and 3rd floors were used for public school, and then it maintained the private status at the bottom. Then in 1936, after the New Deal by President Roosevelt was signed, the Works Progress Administration actually built the Newport Academy. There weren't really public school systems, so during that New Deal, Newport actually began to take public funding and then was actually one of the first public school systems in the state of Kentucky. It then moved into a public school system where the 2nd and 3rd floors were used for public schools and then eventually turned into an entirely public school system. It then was for about 7 decades run as a public elementary school. Then it was desegregated in 1955, where then the African American students and the white students were together. During the height of the school district and Newport School, people came from Appalachia and from different areas of Kentucky, which really made them create a lot more schools in the Newport area. Then in the 80s and 90s, there was a decline in the population where Newport actually restructured their school system. A number of them were closed and sold, and the Newport Academy was then sold in about 2015, actually torn down in 2018 for the construction of the Academy Apartments. When you tear down a landmark, then it's an obligation to put back in to the historical parts of the city. So in order to continue to preserve the history of the 4th Street School, they saved part of the stone wall and built a fireplace in the courtyard of the Academy Apartments. In addition, they saved some of the chalkboards and used them as deli boards in different restaurants throughout Newport.
The era of Prohibition had lasting effects on the societal norms regarding America's bar culture, and Newport, Kentucky was a city leading that influence. The Thompson House, along with the Syndicate, are two establishments still standing that give a nod to that far-gone era. But during their heyday, there were many casino bars and juke joints, which were home for and catered to many great African-American musicians. The nightlife of Newport, Kentucky was well known as a hotbed for gambling, illegal drinking, prostitution, and a place where Cincinnati blues musicians performed for mobsters, gangsters, and music fans alike. During the early 1950s, you could find such musical greats as Alonzo Lonnie Johnson performing at 333 Club. Johnson was a highly influential blues musician whose electric guitar playing style was a forerunner for blues legend B.B. King. Johnson was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame posthumously in 1990. Mabel Smith was a famous Cincinnati-based blues and R&B singer who recorded under the name Big Maybelle. She frequently performed in many of Northern Kentucky's clubs during the 1940s and 50s, including Club Alibi, located at 310 Central Avenue, the Sportsman Club, located at 330 Central Avenue, and the Ebony Club. In addition, national headliners such as jazz legend Cab Calloway and R&B legend Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin performed at the Sportsman Club and the Coppola Club, which was formerly the 333 Club in Newport. It is often difficult to find information about African Americans before and just after the Civil War. The Lumpkins family, an African American family, were previously enslaved by James Taylor. When Taylor died in 1848, he named in his will Susan and her husband Burl Lumpkins to be freed and that they be provided a wagon, a mule, and tools that the family could use to take care of themselves. Also in Taylor's will, it stipulated that if any of his male sons would stay and work for Taylor's sons, then when they reached the age of 30, the estate would give the Lumpkins' son 25 acres and $25 to live on. And one of those sons was William Lumpkins, who became the first African American in Campbell County to vote. William Lumpkins had always been available to work for Taylor, so when he reached the age of 30, as was stipulated in the will, he expected to receive the promised 25 acres and the money. Taylor Jr., the executor of the estate, refused to honor the will of his father. It wasn't until 1883 that he was given the right to sue the Taylor estate. The court ruled in Lumpkins' favor in 1891, but by that time, the estate was gone and there was no money nor land for them. It continued to be difficult for African Americans to build wealth all the way through the Jim Crow era, where it was illegal in Kentucky for African Americans to build homes or businesses in predominantly white areas and to rent property, which all greatly diminished their ability to own and operate viable businesses, creating one of the most lucrative avenues for business ownership being through illegal means. Northern Kentucky's black mobsters have traditionally been excluded from many of the avenues and benefits of capitalism by restrictive Jim Crow laws, and left out of many narratives that glorify mob history here in Newport. But during the 1940s, the Sportsmen, a prominent black organized gang in Newport led by Stephen Big Steve L. Payne and his brothers, came to prominence. And the Sportsman's Club, a popular nightclub and casino bar in Newport's black community, derived its name from this very gang.